Hey everyone, my name's Rodney and I'm just a big boned, and this is day 146 of my weight loss journey. And today I'm going to share with you another personal story from my life, story that has really taught me some really valuable lessons that have helped me on my life journey, not just my weight loss journey. And you may remember a few weeks ago, I shared with you the story about my mum. So I think it's only fair this time I share with you the story about my dad. And there's a lot that I've taken away from this from my relationship with my dad. It hasn't been a pleasant ride, shall we say. So by the time I was born, my dad was onto his second marriage. He'd had a first marriage. He had two daughters from that previous marriage, and then he met my mum. They got married, had two miscarriages before I was born, and then my brother was born. My earliest memory I have of my parents, and I remember I think they're in a kitchen, and they're yelling and screaming at each other. And I remember I don't know, maybe I'm 2 or 3, I don't remember. But I just remember looking up at them, feeling scared. And I remember my little brother clinging onto my leg because he was also scared. And this was not uncommon for my parents to be fully fighting in front of us. In fact, we even witnessed my dad hitting my mum. So in my early childhood years, I grew up in, this domestic violence environment. My dad was a drinker, and when he got drunk, he got mean and he got violent. And that was eventually what ruined my parents' marriage. So very early on in the piece, my parents got divorced. My mum got my brother and I and left. And my mum had custody of us, but we would go to my dad's every second weekend. And so we go there, and by night times, my dad would get drunk. And to little kids, that was scary because he was loud and he was violent. He'd moved on. He married someone else, my stepmom. And there was even times I remember when, my stepmom came in, she'd been crying, and she said, "You have to get your mum to come and get you because your dad's just hit me." And so this is what it was like when we went to my dad's. And naturally, brother and I, we were scared and we didn't want to go. And we, the Friday night before we go to my dad's, there would be a lot of tantrums, crying, screaming from us because we had to go to our dad's, and we didn't want to. But my mum's sort of thinking, look, you have to go, otherwise, I could get in a lot of trouble here. So in a bind, what she used to do, because not far from my dad's place was a McDonald's. So she used to bribe us. If you come along, we'll get McDonald's for dinner before you go there. And it's no wonder I learned to use food as some sort of coping mechanism, and that really only clicked for me, only a few years ago, really. And that's the way it was for a number of years. Visit my dad, not wanting to, tantrums, getting drunk. We were scared. We were little kids. We couldn't leave. We couldn't defend ourselves if we had to. I never had to. But we're just scared. We didn't know what to do, and we just felt absolutely powerless. And no doubt this is where a lot of my issues developed. In fact, later on in life, when I'm about 11, and I started developing a lot of anxiety and started seeing the counselors said it's his dad's involvement in his life that is causing these issues. So I'm about 12, and finally, my mum has had enough. She says, I'm just going to have to wear the consequences, and says, you don't have to go anymore. And, you know, that wasn't the end of it. It was the end of a large chunk of it. But, you know, in the very beginning of that, my dad would ring up, drunk, why are you coming over, blah, blah, blah. So we just were scared, passed the phone off to my mum. And I remember throughout my life being scared of my dad. Hearing his voice on the phone would elicit a fear response. And we couldn't, even though the phone couldn't stand up to him and say how we felt, because we're little kids and we're scared. And it wasn't until I was 16 when I finally spoke up to him. He called me up again on the phone, and I said, I don't want to see you because I hate you. And, you know, there's a lot of fear there, and you're an alcoholic, and if we're going to have any sort of relationship, you need to change. And he said, well, you know, I disagree, I'm not an alcoholic. I was like, well, clearly you are. And that's where that phone conversation left. I still remember a few times after that, my 18th birthday, I saw him outside the house. He dropped something in a letterbox for me. And again, I was just scared, paralyzed with fear. And then 2 more times I saw him when my niece and nephew were born, respectively. And again, I was there. I was civil, but still a lot of fear. Now, fast forward to when I'm 29 years old and I've woken up out of my coma. And at this stage, over the years, I'd seen a counsellor a lot of times. I had, become a counsellor myself. I'd worked on myself a lot. Hadn't seen my dad, didn't really want to. But I was told that while I was in a coma, he came and saw me. And I said, look, does he at least know that I'm alive? And they said, yeah, my sisters have told him, but he wants to come and see you. And so I said, okay. And when he came into hospital, I saw him in a much different light for the first time in my life. You know, he was no longer this big, scary, out of control dude. He looked like a frail little old man. And for the first time in my life, I felt, you know what? I don't need to be scared anymore, because if I had to, I could knock you on your ass. You know, if I was in a situation where I had to defend myself against you, or I had to get away from you, I can, because now I'm an adult. And all of that stuff that I'd felt towards him was now gone, and I realized that it was gone. And so I sat there, had a conversation, and he said he wanted to see me more, and I said okay. So over the next couple of years, I would go over for, family occasions, Christmas and that sort of stuff, and I started to rebuild this relationship with him. And we weren't close, because we were very different people at this stage, but we'd start to repair and heal. So a couple of years after that, my mum dies of cancer, and I have no family unit now. So I went to him and I said, look, I need a family. You're it. And he said, yeah, that's fine. Then a couple of weeks after that, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And about 7 months after that diagnosis, he died of cancer. And I remember being at his funeral, looking around, going, "Holy crap! I'm at my dad's funeral." I remember being a teenager and really hating on him, thinking I'd never be at his funeral, I'd never go. But here I am, and it just showed me how far I'd grown just as a person. And I even remember back to that conversation I had with him when I was 16. I said, if we're going to have any sort of relationship, you need to change. And in the end, he didn't change. It was me who had changed. And even after that, I remember finding out more about his childhood. So I didn't know a lot about my dad. And I found out from my sisters that when he was a child, his mum left he and his sister with their grandparents to be raised, and she went off and married some other guy and raised his kids. And I can't imagine how that must have felt for him. The abandonment, the pain. What does that do to your self-esteem? Your mum, the one who's supposed to love you more than anyone else in the world, just leaves you and is raising other people's kids. I can't imagine what that would have done to someone. And it was no wonder he turned to alcohol. He grew up in a time when men weren't free to talk, when they couldn't express how they were feeling. They had to deal with their ways in other ways. And so he turned to alcohol. And it's no wonder. I'd obviously had my childhood trauma as well, and I dealt with it in a very different way. I went the other way and I spoke about it, and I didn't turn to alcohol. And I'm much more advanced than my dad. And it was to sort of realize that has sort of really helped put things in perspective. And I no longer have this hatred and this fear around him. And it's, I can't imagine. I can't put it into words. Final thing I want to sort of mention. In between my mum dying and my dad dying, I was seeing a counsellor just to make sure I was okay. And she set me an exercise where I had to write a letter to my mum and a letter to my dad. She said, these letters are just for you. They're not going to be sent, but I just want you to get everything out. And I remember thinking, I don't know what's the point in writing a letter to my dad. I've expressed all this stuff and I've dealt with this stuff already, but just shut up and go along with it. So I started writing a letter. And, I started writing about how he wasn't the dad that I wanted. I wanted a dad that was more hands-on and involved, someone I was close to, and I didn't get that. And while writing this letter and writing these words, it was like a thought occurred to me. I got a lightning bolt straight to the head, and all of a sudden everything became clear. Because of the dad that I had, that was the reason why I first started going to counselling in the first place. That is probably the reason why I then went on to become a counsellor and to learn self-development. Because of the issues I had, I've learned to overcome them. And without that, if I had have had the same dad but was involved, I wouldn't have become the person that I am today. And I actually quite like who I am, and I like what I do. I don't like everything I've experienced, but overcoming that has made me who I am today. And that's when I realized he wasn't the dad that I wanted, but he was the dad that I needed to become the person I am now. And once I understood that, my dear perception about life just altered. So yeah, that's basically the story of my dad, and how it's played a part in shaping who I am today. Please, if you've learned anything from this, if you've taken anything from this story, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe and follow me on my journey. I am loving all the support that I'm getting from you guys. Over 130 of you now all following me, and it is really making a difference. So please continue to like, continue to support, continue to leave comments. Thanks again for watching, and just remember, I'm not fat, I'm just big boned.